Good morning. On behalf of ICF India Conclave, hosted by ICF Chennai Charter Chapter, along with other chapters in the country, this is Uday. Hearty greetings and warm welcome to this session on coaching for fostering organizational values, ethics, and ethos, the leadership experience. Well, this session is going to be highly a deep dive, very incisive, and also meaningful in terms of takeaways potentially that will be available for all the attendees. Let me give you a heads up about the session. Interested with the time, talent, and potential of employees, organization leaders are uniquely positioned to serve as both guardians and champions of institutionalizing ethical workplace culture. Strong ethical culture generates trust, employee engagement, and commitment. It also facilitates leaders in unlocking employee energies. Coaching falls into place this way. Yes, coaching helps in creating more relationship and trust among employees aligned to the core values of their respective organizations, which transcend mere self-interest to do what is right, and even when the right thing is hard to do. I repeat, transcend the self-interest to do what is right, even when the right thing is hard to do. The two speakers are veteran and role model leaders. They're well accomplished professionals of high repute, having worked in diverse corporate cultures across industries. They will share from the lens of senior leadership how ethics and core values are very important to run a business, encounter and overcome complex challenges, and how specifically coaching initiatives promote practice of ethics and adds value to the progress of the organizations, enhance employee pride and engagement, apart from infusing such belief and practice among all key stakeholders in the ecosystem. I am really honored to introduce one of the two speakers for the day, and good friend of mine, and we've been together in the same alma mater long ago. How long ago you can guess as I go through the bio of my good friend. This is Nathan, partner and chief talent officer at Deloitte India, based in Hyderabad, and also works out of Mumbai. He graduated in BSc Maths from Vivekananda College, Chennai in 1981 and passed out from the prestigious B School XLRI, having done PGPIR hailing from the batch of 1983. He launched an illustrious career as personal manager at ICI India, where he served from 1983 to 1994 and anchored himself in the tough terrains of industry or industrial relations. Thereafter, he seamlessly grew to various senior roles in HR from 1994, held with Sterling Holiday Resorts, Microland, Planet Asia, Reliance Infocom, before embarking his journey with Deloitte in 2005, wherein he also serves as the talent executive leadership of Deloitte Asia Pacific. Nathan is a respected voice in the human resource fraternity. He is currently the national president of NHRDN, the largest body of human resources fraternity in India, and chairman of Sumeda's NGO for Education and Research devoted to OD. In addition to have been acknowledged for immensely contributed field of HR, he is hailed as a revered mentor, having groomed several HR professionals who remain lifetime grateful to him. I have been a witness to several conversations about him being spoken about such high esteem. He was aptly recognized as a distinguished alumnus by XLRI's alma mater. He was acknowledged as one of the top voices of LinkedIn in 2020. Interestingly, Nathan is well known for his Office Truths post on LinkedIn, which consistently garners hundreds of zealous followers. A few months ago, this is very interesting, he co-authored a book along with Dr. K. Sinha titled The Bahrupian Challenge, Inventing the New HR. The fun fact of Nathan is that it's quite interesting. He's an adept storyteller, very skillful at that, who captivates audiences anytime, anywhere. It's not going to be different today. Over to you, my friend Nathan.
Uday, thank you so much. First of all, it's a little difficult. I thought Mr. Gopalakrishnan was going to come in first. And I thought I'm going to get a bit of a breather, listen to his stories. And now I find that I'm now the opening batsman. So, um,
Nathan, would you wish that I check with Gopal? He has some difficulty in coming in. Can I check with
oh
him
yeah,
whether
please. That would be great.
Gopal, good morning.
I'm here. Good
Okay,
morning.
so morning. There was some difficulty for you to come in, I believe. But do you have the 1 hour time with you, or can we allow another speak? Or the understanding is you speak first. I am flexible.
Let Gopal go first, please.
Well, if you'll allow me to speak first, because I have my grandchild whom I'm waiting to take out for an
Please,
outing,
Gopal.
and the time is a bit unpredictable. But
Okay,
her wish is my command.
all
So
right. So
I
Gopal.
may, Nathan, miss a bit of what you're saying. Well, granddaughter wins.
Okay,
Absolutely.
That's what
so
I've been
thanks.
coached in by my wife.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan, for being flexible. And I will move on to introducing Gopal and allow him the space. R. Gopal Krishnan, affectionately known as Gopal, CEO, Mindworks, author, and corporate advisor based in Mumbai, India. He graduated in BSc Physics from St. Xavier's College, Kolkata University, and Electrical and Electronics Engineering from IIT Kharagpur, and attended the Advanced Management Program at Harvard Business School. He has been a professional manager from 1967. He has served in senior leadership roles such as Chairman of Unilever Arabia, MD of Brook Bond Lipton, Vice Chairman of Hindustan Lever, Executive Director of Tata Sons and several Tata Group companies. He also serves as independent director listed in listed companies like Akzo Nobel India, Castrol India, and Hemas Holdings. Gopal passionately mentors a few startups and is actively engaged in both instructional and inspirational speaking. Instructional, and hear me again, inspirational speaking. Amazingly, he has also authored 16 books since 2007. What a record. To mention about a few seminal works here, the few titles: Doodles on Leadership, Experience Within and Beyond Tata, When the Penny Drops, Learning What's Not Taught, Crash, Lessons from the Entry and Exit of CEOs. In addition, he has rendered over 100 keynotes in India and abroad, speaks volumes of how much delegation audience loves to be enriched by him. Gopal has been an ardent newspaper columnist and continues to write every month for financial papers. We are honored and privileged and delighted, Gopal, to have you in our presence. Over to you.
Thank you, Uday, for that introduction. As your name suggests, you're the rising sun and you're pointing to somewhere else, but we share a surname, so I accept it. Uh, I'm not a coach, uh, but I do mentor. And there is a difference between the two that I am seeing is that a coach is somebody who has been trained to coach. A mentor is somebody who coaches instinctively. And I belong in that category. I've never passed any American coaching institute exam or any formal training. But ultimately, everybody knows experience maketh the man. And for a long time, the many industrial processes and our educational system prior to that make us into what I call IC managers. IC standing for inspection and correction. So getting through your school days, your college days, your SAT exams, GMAT, all that is inspection and correction. As you get into your company, if you're in the quality control department, you inspect and correct. If you're doing appraisal of somebody, you inspect and correct. So they are very positive sort of forces, a bit like thunder and lightning, are not possible to miss. But this category of coaching and mentoring is a OC process, observing and curious. It floats like the clouds, and it is not like thunder and lightning. Observing and curious doesn't come naturally to any manager because he's not supposed to be a poet, a right brain guy. And I am a strong believer that in the early part of your career, this has been my experience at any rate, in the early part of your career, you tend to be an IC person. And as you grow not necessarily in age. Age is a poor surrogate. You become an OC person, observing and curious person. But not doesn't happen to everybody, but I've had that privilege. So what coaching is the art of learning what is not taught. Now, I've used a very simple definition. The moment I say the art of learning, it puts the onus on the coachee or the mentee. And the moment I say what is not taught, it is not a programmed piece of information which can be explicitly taught. It is implicit. And I want to narrate to you, that's all I can do, not being a trained coach and don't have the qualifications for it. Uh, want to narrate to you 4 brief anecdotes, if time permits. I think I'll finish in another 15 minutes or so, as Uday has briefed me, so that there's some time for questions. So I'll take maybe 4 or 5 minutes per episode to illustrate that the onus of coaching is a lot more on the person who's being coached. A seeker is required before a guru can teach him. So, what are these 4 things? And what did I take out of those experiences? The first is when I was a young fellow, 9 years old, my father put me into a tennis coaching scheme. And there used to be a coach there. And he was a real coach. I mean, he's a Davis Cup player, Dilip Bose. In the 1940s and the 50s, he became a coach. And we were very eager to start getting onto the court, hit the ball. And he would actually make us run around the tennis court 3 or 4 times till we were pretty tired before he would allow us to get onto the tennis court. One day I asked him, I said, "Sir, we get tired before we get here. Why are you insisting on doing this?" He could have told me, he could have said, all in line. What he said to me is, if your body was, if your only car, but what was the only that car you have ever in your life, how would you look after it? I said, he said, like a Parsi. I said, yes, like a Parsi, very, very carefully. He said, well, this body of yours is the only car you're going to get in your life. You never change it. So if you're not physically fit, you cannot be alert. That's why I make it around 4 times. No, I was old. I was 9 years old. I wasn't seeking to be coached. He was supposed to be a coach in tennis. But a lifelong lesson has stayed with me because I was a seeker. I just happened to be the guru through a certain wisdom, through them. He just to his mouth. A certain precept came to my mind. And ever since the age of 9, as my family joked me, I'm a bit of a physique appropriate to my age. And as a simple example, not for me to, but I'm giving that of gentle raindrops from heaven. Bad thing for learn. Gentle raindrops. I use those words advisedly. Gentle raindrops from heaven. You don't have to be torrentially wet by a monsoon. Gentle raindrops from heaven, but you must be ready to receive them. This second episode I would like to mention is that I was born and raised in Calcutta. And in the one day the principal, who was a Jesuit, called me and said, I would like to recommend you for a job as a management trainee in a company called McKinsey. Now, those of you who were born and raised in Calcutta, you will know that your dream job is to get a job in Fairley Place, Dalhousie Square. Then you become a good boxwala. And the story was you could retire happily as a member of 5 clubs, etc., etc. So I said, Father, if you recommend my name, it's a double honor. Firstly, that the college has selected me. And secondly, if I get that job, it will be a dream job. So I went. And various people interviewed me. And finally, they said, we would like you to meet Mr. Modas. I said, who's he? He's the managing director and CEO of McKinsey. I said, wow, I'm a 19, 20-year-old BSc, yet to become BSc graduate. Why would the MD want to see me? Anyway, I went along and he looked at me pensively and said, "Son, may I call you son?" "Sir, you're much older than me. Of course you can call me son." He said, "I have no questions to ask you other than one. And you don't please take offense at my asking this question. Take offense at asking, does your family need you to take this job?"
Gopal, can I step in for a
Hello?
second?
Yeah?
Uh, I believe there is a
Yeah?
lag in the voice. There is a correction that you can make on the bottom side. You have the LD connection as of now. You can just change over to LD. That's a suggestion from the AirMate tech support team on the
From
right side
HD, I should
bottom.
move to the other one, the red one?
LD.
That's the
Yeah,
red
correct.
one.
To move to LD. Red one is no,
Huh?
not the, that's the red one is the recording. You have the LD. You click on that. You have the high definition, low definition.
Ah.
That's a low definition. So move into the low
Okay.
definition,
Now,
Gopal.
yeah, I've got, I'm in LD now. Is it better?
Okay, it's
Anyway, you see as we
I
go along,
suppose
and if I'm not, interrupt me. You,
yeah. So
okay.
go on,
Thank you for that
go on.
interruption
Sorry,
and to
Gopal.
make it more effective.
Yeah, thank you. Most welcome.
So, Mr. Mohidas said, does your family require you to take that job? And I said, no. I mean, they recommended me, and I'm very keen because I'll get 450 rupees a month, and etc. He said, I did my career from the 20s onwards. You're going to do your career from the 60s onwards. It's a different world that you're going to see compared to the one I saw. If your family doesn't require you to take the job, please study more and qualify yourself. But I can tell you one thing: if your family does need you to take the job, you have the job. I went back very confused. And when I told my father, of course, he was furious that without asking him, I had gone and given the impression that the family required me to take the job. But that's exactly what I did, because the family did not require me financially to take that job. And thank God I did, because all of Fairley Place and Dalhousie Square got decimated, and McKinnon and McKinsey, I don't know if it still exists. And the lesson that I got, Mohidas wasn't trying to mentor me or coach me, but I was a seeker, and I saw him as the gentle raindrop, the guru, who was telling me, think of your career long term, not short term. 450 rupees today is worth nothing. Think of 2000. And I said, 2000? I don't need much more than 450 bucks a month to live happily ever after. And now that we are in 2021, I see I was very well mentored and coached, but it happened because he was observing and created the curiosity. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't say, go back and don't take this job. That would have been a very different approach. But he made me curious. What if you didn't take this job? And we are very poor at asking open ended questions because managers are trained to be clear headed and directional and instructional. The third example, and maybe I'll stop with the third example so that there's a little time for interaction, is the lesson that I learned called trust but verify. I then started my career after my studies, and I was fortunate to rise quite well. And at 41, I was appointed as a director of Hindustan Lever, and I was called the export director. And in those days, Hindustan Lever had to do all sorts of funny products exports. Funny meaning they were not in the core business of soap, shampoo, detergents, and dalda. And we were getting into carpets and garments and all sorts of other things, of which we knew nothing. So we used to recruit people from outside, and people came in mid-level or senior level. And I had been trained in all the management books and courses that I attended that you must delegate, empower, and trust your people. You can't do a tightly controlled operation. And I did so. One fine day, when my arrogance must have been at a fairly high level at 41. If you're appointed as the director of Hindustan Lever, you do tend to get a bit stuffy. I got a call from a colleague saying that 1 crore of rupees was missing. Now, 1 crore of rupees is a lot of money in those days. And in short, it turned out that one of the people who is a specialist in carpets or garments, whom we recruited from outside, had fudged a lot of things. And we could not find a crore of rupees. Now, those of you who are old enough will remember that in the 80s, which is what I'm talking about, 1985, a crore of rupees of foreign exchange meant that it was Ferra and you could go into jail. I put the whole company into jeopardy. Luckily for me, I went to the chairman and I said, I know a director is supposed to be blue eyed, square jawed, but I've got some problem and I don't know how to handle it. Admitting your vulnerability was accidental. I didn't sort of decide to admit my vulnerability, but it brought the whole company to come and help me. And I made an honest mistake, and the company supported me. And in fact, to credit of Hindustan Lever, my career didn't suffer either. And my chairman would say to me, Gopal, you're right. You must delegate, you must empower people, but trust, but verify. So I've given you these three examples, and I won't take the fourth example in the interest of time so that I don't eat into probably a much richer exposition from S.V. Nathan. And I would ask Uday, as he has suggested, that having stopped at 11:20, you can take the next 5-7 minutes for any questions that you may wish to ask or somebody else may, because the genre of stories that I have is in the same direction. The seeker must seek. The guru appears before him. There is nobody anointed as a guru. This is not to diminish the role of a coach. Don't get me wrong, because to be able to observe and make curious is the skill that a coach must acquire. That is exactly the skill. But many people do it naturally. Uday, over to you.
Thank you, Gopal. This is awesome listening to you. At this point in time, I need to confess the entire audience has been glued to you, so much so the Q&A section is empty, which implies they've been glued to what you've been saying, and so much humility and so much authenticity. I like the way you said the vulnerability being accidental. I'd like to pose a question to you. It's about the stories that you talked about, the gentle drops from the heaven, raindrops from the heaven, which to me was very meaningful as a metaphor. And going back to the last story where he talked about, the HUL, where the issue was about trust, I consider, what he talked about in that story was not just gentle, but something very heavy because it would have costed the organization. And this topic being focused on coaching for organizational values and ethics, what was something which went in you, within your conscious, if you can recall and recapitulate to the delegates now?
Of that particular episode,
Yes, yes, Gopal.
my I can admit my throat was dry. I was I was absolutely devastated. The turnover of the company, the division I was leading at that time was 80-90 crores. It struggled to make any profit in those days. To say a crore has vanished and we can't track it is a bit thick. And I was so confused that I told my colleague who called me from Dubai to say, I've gone through all the things and this is what I'm finding. I said, give me 2 hours to think about it. So I had never read or heard of Daniel Kahneman at that time. But the idea that you must think about it came probably instinctively, that I shouldn't immediately say, don't tell anybody, keep quiet. I didn't tell him anything. I then went to my old mentor, my boss, the late Bipin Shah, who was also a fellow director of the company, with whom I'd worked for many years before I joined the board. And I said, Bipin, I don't know what's happened. I need your advice. And he said, Gopal, you don't know all the facts, but there are three options that you have. First, tell your people to keep quiet and keep investigating the matter. That's what will happen in the public domain if you see government and PSUs and so on. Your second choice is to say, wait a few more days till more facts come and I'm better equipped. Your third choice is to say, I really don't know what's hit me. Can somebody help? He said, if you take the third option, you will have the whole of Hindustan Lever behind you. If you take the first two options, you'll have them in front of you. Now, if I said, what should I do? He said, walk straight to Ashok Ganguly's room and tell him you have a problem. The moment you tell another person, I'm vulnerable, I have a problem, it doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are. people reach out. It's only when you say, I have absolutely no problem. You look at the public space, you'll find people who are not willing to admit there's a problem. So that's the thing I can remember. So there's a coaching coming in multiple ways. When I got into a problem, I went to Bipin Shah. He coached me like a gentle drop of rain from heaven. I acted on it. It worked. I survived. And then I grew again. And to me, this is, I've done this, I've told this story many times because it keeps reminding me of the lesson that every leader has to know, that finally we will all end up in Chandanwadi or whichever burial ground or whichever faith you belong to. And the cemeteries and the crematoriums of this world are filled with people who thought they were too important and the company will miss them. But they're all gone. So I said, while I'm still alive, let me remind myself of these stories.
Powerful insight. You can go by the emoticons, Gopal, the number of emoticons loving you and loving what you shared just now. And let me pick up one from the audience now.
Is that what all these is that what all these emoticons mean? These hearts and dark glasses and so on?
You are saying the story with so much of conviction and so much of value-based edifice that you worked on and built on over the years. And that comes through the story, Gopal. It's an acknowledgement for you. It's an acknowledgement.
Thank
And
you.
I'm very humbled to listen to you on behalf of the audience in getting this story and assimilating the real nuggets from that. Let me pick up one from the audience and I'll put that on the stage. Heard about trust. There you are. Heard about that trust, but verify. I've always wondered, do we need to verify if the trust is already built? This is from Sunil Shatri, he's a coach, Inner World at Bangalore.
Sunil, that's a very good question. No trust is 100%. Like you don't make jewelry out of 24 karat gold. You make it 22, 20, or 18, depending on durability, prices. In the same way, there is nothing called 100% trust. If you trust a person, you start at 60 and then it gradually inches up 65, 70. So trust but verify is the lesson that I took out. There is no, yes, if you've been together for a long time, I mean, I'm not saying you be suspicious about your spouse in case you're taking a marital example that you keep verifying all the time on your wife, but trust but verify is what works in my humble experience. Trust without verification can land you in the kind of problem that I landed in. You hand over your blank check to somebody and say, I trust you fully. Well, someday something may happen. Once in a while, have a look at it. My wife does this with great practical intelligence. The vegetables comes, she does not check every single item, whether it's $80 a kilo or $100 a kilo. But once in a while, she'll add them up, she'll subtract them. She will just check with somebody else. And then the other guy knows she's watching, and that's all right. It keeps the place going.
Yeah. The credibility of trust I spoke about is about living moment by moment and being present in valuing trust and savoring it. Here is another one for you. I'm sure you would really enjoy speaking about it. Would you say there was divine intervention in your journey? This is by Dr. Winston Jacob. Would you say there was a divine intervention?
I would say there is not just divine intervention. God walked with me every step. That's my self-perception. I'm answering your question. It wasn't an intervention. The gurus and the spiritual masters say God will walk with you. I have experienced it. And I'm not a spiritual or a guru person. I mean, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm not greatly ritualistic. Each of these was when the unseen hand came to my rescue. And there are many examples like this. I mean, I could go on, but I shouldn't. The short answer is, when you believe, then you are given. And if you don't believe, then you seek. And if you seek, also you're given. But if you neither believe nor you seek, then it's not given. So I hope I've answered Winston's question.
You did.
I can tell you, I'm a great I wrote a chapter in one of my books called Doodles on Leadership on luck. I didn't want to give it a religious, spiritual connotation. So I called it luck. And I do believe luck plays a role. Now, you can interpret luck as divine intervention, or you can call it God, or you can call it misfortune or fortune. But I do believe in luck. I don't bet on it, but I believe in it. Just like I believe in my religion, but I don't bet on it.
That was very profound, Gopal. I believe in it, but I don't bet on it. I suppose in coaching and mentoring, we as coaches and mentors ought to believe in the process plus the process, not bet on it. Betting on it could be moving
Correct.
on to what you said earlier about arrogance and away from the zone of humility. And there is so much wisdom that he offered, in terms of your insights, experiences, rock solid experience, I would say, which bore the cardinal principles of value, ethos, and ethics. Talking about divinity, today being the third day of ICF India Conclave, it's the turn of serendipity to have you with us with all the experience and the roles that you had, held previously. Bringing you in this forum has been a fortune for us. It's a divine intervention, and I bow to the divinity in you and the divinity at large in the macro space. Thank you very much, Gopal, for having accepted the invitation, graciously come over and invested so much time, and more importantly, so much presence that you brought in to add value to these delegates. There are 83 of them listening to you, and I'm sure they're going to take away not just for the session, for lifetime to come. So we're deeply, deeply grateful to you, Gopal.
Thank you. You're very kind. And if Nathan, you don't mind, I will listen till my granddaughter shouts, and I will go where the call is therefore to be taken. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Don't mistake me if I go where.
No, no, not at all, not at all. Gopal,
Please
thank
go
you so
ahead.
much.
Okay, so
And
Nathan,
thank you, ICF, for inviting me. Much.
yeah, our pleasure and delight. Nathan, since I've already introduced you, I'm not going to do that without much ado. You are there, out there with me and the audience.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, Gopal, you may not know this eons ago, years ago, I mean, long, long ago, centuries ago, maybe. I came up to you and you offered me a job. This was in Brookborn. Um, that was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I was fresh out of XLRI. I met somebody in Calcutta. I said, "You must meet Mr. Gopal Krishnan." And I don't know, for some reason, it just went off. And I went and joined ICI. And then, of course, the journey took over. But it's very, very heartening to hear you. Um, Everybody who's on the call, it's very difficult to speak after Gopal. It's how do I, it's almost like, when all the soldiers are around and the major is speaking, and suddenly you have the general descend on them, and everybody is listening with rapt attention to the general because he's got greater experience. Everything is there, and when he goes away, the major still has that task of bringing everybody back and getting those people to listen to him. So the major looks at everybody and says, "Soldiers, the general has made some general points, and now the major will make some major points." So what I'm about to do is, as we look at anything to do with ethics, values, ethos, um, I'm not going to spend and pontificate on a lot of things which are around, either in the form of frameworks or books and so on. But I will focus on a few lessons that have come my way. We all learn only from what happens to us. Gopal said that very well. It's about how we observe and how we learn. Um, starts with starts with my limiting belief, or my belief as such. I wanted to be an athlete. In my younger days, I wanted to be an athlete. My father was one, and so I went up to my mother. She says, "Go to the playground. You'll find a coach. You ask him." In those days, you really had playgrounds. They had coaches, uh, and went up to him, and I told him I want to be a sprinter. So he says, "Okay, run this 100 meters." I ran the 100 meters in all of 17 seconds and came back to him, looked at me, shook his head, and he says, uh, no go, this will not work. I went home very disappointed, went to my mother, I was almost in tears. She says, what happened? And I explained this. He said, ask the wrong question. You asked the coach what you could be good at. And so I went back again. And in those days, you had to touch the coach's feet. I touched his feet. I still do. And he said, what happened? You're back again. So I said, would you please let me know what I could be good at? So he said, okay, start running. I kept running 1 round, 2 rounds. And after the 8th, 9th round on a 400-meter track, he says, son, you could be good at middle and long distance running. I still remember this as if this happened yesterday. In each one of us, there's always something which is such a very powerful strength that we know not of, and we all need coaches. Somebody who could tell us what we are good at. At work, many of us are being told you're not good at this, not good at this. The amount of negatives that we pile on to ourselves, believing that, is kind of misplaced. I was very fortunate because in one of my very early jobs, and since you're talking about ethics, I was given the grand job of being an administrative officer in charge um, of cafeteria and also in charge of administration as it relates to the guest houses. All of us used to stay in guest houses, and there was a colony. I was staying in the colony, and this was in the heart of then Bihar, heart of Jharkhand, a place called Gomia. And at that time, my boss called me and he says, well, Nathan, I have a spring bed and I need you to remove this. You can't remove the spring, but I need you to put a plywood, all of 5 mm thick, and let me know when the job is done. So I took that to heart. I went up and got this job done. By 3 o'clock, I was back in his office and I said, sir, this is over. He says, have you forgotten something? He says, no. I have confirmed with the carpenter. He tells me the job is done. So he says again, have you forgotten anything? I said, sir, I have done the job. He says, where is the invoice? Where is the bill? So I was aghast. I said, there's a company property. The bed belongs to the company. The mattress belongs to the company. Even the curtains that we have there belongs to the company. We maintain it for officers. So I couldn't understand that. And he looked at me and he says, all of this is okay, but that need of a hardback was mine. I have to pay for it. That was my very first lesson in integrity. What it means to stand up and, well, Mr. Jajirikar Ganesh is no more, but I still remember Ganesh because he was to me the leading light of what integrity is about. His son, Sailesh, is now the chief operating officer of PNG worldwide. I can well imagine what happens. Well, you learn a lot because you have great bosses. One day it so happened that I was supposed to give somebody a car and I was in charge of administration, and I didn't have a car because this person was supposed to go from Gomia to a place nearby, a place called Giridi. And I said, I didn't have a car. 3 of them were in the garage. The only other one that I had was supposed to be for an emergency need, explosives plant. And my boss called me to his room and I explained to him I didn't have a car. I was summoned to the general manager's office. He gave me a real dressing down and he was shouting at me. And I just didn't know what to do. And just when I thought that everything was up for me, suddenly the door opens and someone rushes and stands between me and the general manager works, looks at this gentleman and says, sir, if you do not mind, while the person may be responsible, this boy, I am accountable. Looks at me and says, Nathan, go back. That was my foundational learning in leadership. Stand up. Stand up. I moved there on because life is a lot about how you learn from these small incidents. In the same place, there used to be an annual event, and this was all about long distance running. I felt I'm going to be the guy who's going to win this event. Little did I know that there was a gentleman called Vincent Lacra. Vincent Lacra has won these long distance events for almost 20 years on trot, and he was lit. He was the personification of the best athlete you could find anywhere around. Um, all of it was a mini marathon, all of about 20 kilometers. I started the race. This was 26th of Jan, biting cold in the morning, 5:30, and I had done half the race, and I was coming back. Vincent Lacra was almost half a kilometer ahead, and these long roads, which is ups and dales, you could make out that there is no way that you can win this race. And suddenly, out of the blue, there's a green scooter. There's a gentleman with a pagadi, yellow in color. I still remember that. He looks at me, he shouts the choicest of Punjabi expletives and says, "Come on, you can do it. Run, run, run." And you can. And I have no idea what happened to me. And suddenly there was power in my legs. I started pounding the tarred road, or what is left of it in those roads in Gomia then. And I ran and I ran, hell bent for leather, and finally breasted the tape and realized that I had managed to stand just a nick ahead of Vincent Lacra. That's not the story. The story is show up. The story is about show up. Daljit Singh showed up. Daljit Singh had nothing to do with running, but Daljit Singh showed up that day for me. I will ever, ever, ever remember Daljit because he stood up for me. He showed up. Much of my lesson is, can I, in times when people need, can I show up? This is something in more recent times. This is a case of somebody that we had sent from India to the US and from to Canada, actually. From Canada, went on to the US. And unfortunately, that person had something called brain fever, encephalitis. And there was no way that that person could ever survive. He went to the best of hospitals. They all turned him down, saying there's no way. Put him into hospice, which is a general way of saying, let him just waste away and die. His wife in India looked at us, made a couple of calls and said, hey, but this person can come to India. And I would want him here. By the way, the person was in ICU. There was a call. It started at 11 p.m. The CEO of the firm, the CFO, you name the top brass in the firm, global as well as the US firm, everybody was on it. And at that point in time, the discussions went from one end to almost a point where people had decided that there's no point in pursuing this case. You need an air ambulance. It has to stop in 7 places because that's a rule. You cannot fly for more than 5 hours at a stretch. There's no way that the person can come to India and alive. And suddenly in that room, there was a voice, and this was very tentative. This voice came by and said, hey, if that person had not gone to Canada and thereon to the US, the person would be alive in India. And by the way, India has some good doctors, maybe not as good as the ones that you would find in the US, but these are people who have handled these cases. Why don't we give this a chance? I think when the soldier was needed, the soldier went to the US. It's now time for the soldier to come back home. So my humble suggestion is, let's send the soldier home. There was a silence for all of 1 minute. And suddenly the CEO spoke and said, let us send the soldier home. And I just couldn't believe it. because that voice that spoke that day is speaking to you today. I had learned the fundamentals of speaking up. I was very scared. How can I speak in front of all these people? I was new to the job. And these were the biggest guys in the planet. Then I realized there is in us something, two words, speak up. And I'm going to take another one which is pretty close to me, which is build up. Build up. Oh, there's a young professional. I'm going to call her Ramya. Ramya was confident. She did a great job. For some reason, it just went from one to the other to a third, and it came to a point where Ramya was constantly told by her boss that she was not good enough. Anything and everything she tried to do was seen as an effort in futility. Ramya put down her papers. And I remember her boss came up to me and said, Nathan, we should never let Ramya go. I said, okay, so what should we be doing? What should you be doing? So he says, give me some time. I'll work very closely with her. And so it happened that Ramya, who was rated as below par, took the next 6 months working very closely with a person. And over a period of time, Ramya did so well that today Ramya is seen as the epitome of anything to do with excellence. I would say that all of the marks that I learned about how you build up is from that gentleman who currently is one of my very, very close friends. How do you really build up professionals? How do you build up their confidence? How are you encouraging of them? Let them do anything and everything that there is about. And as they say, I spoke to you about build up. I spoke to you about speak up, take up, show up, stand up, hold up. Very first one, shake up. It's now time for me. My last one is pack up. All that I wanted to share with you is done. So with this, Uday, back to you for your Q&As.
Well, Nathan, truly invigorating to say the least. You are infectious and ardent as a storyteller. And all these stories were consistently connecting to the core of this session and the focus of the session, ethics, values. If I were to ask you a question at this point in time, we had in this conclave many speakers talking about walking the talk, congruence, authenticity, not to be hypocritical. If you were to talk about your travel to move away from the outer voices and be in sync with your inner voice, which is about your conscience, which is about your congruence, which is about the core of walking the talk, what do you think were the success factors? Because you speak with so much conviction on these stories, and last one about Ramya was heart-rending and touching. What is that? What is that bucket of success factors which enable you to be what you are and to speak with us with so much conviction, flair, and honesty?
I think it's about faith. And so Uday, I'm going to share something with you. It's a personal story. I think all of us need a helping hand. Years ago, there was a boy who was from a very humble background. His grandmother had all of one leg. They used to stay in a house which had privacy curtains, the jute bags that used to be sewn together as a backdrop, as a front drop, so to speak. And the boy used to go to a corporation school. Those days, you didn't have any of these benches sit on the ground, frayed bottoms, because the floor was not the mosaic floors that you see today. Every day in the evening, this grandmother used to sit down and tell stories and put a little bit of curd rice in each of these people who came to listen to her stories. I used to be very fascinated with those stories and be very close with her. And one day it so happened when she was telling a story, um, one of the boys out there happened to look somewhere else. And the grandmother slapped the boy and says, "I'm telling you a story, you're not listening to me." The boy said, "Grandma, I just saw a car go by." "What about the car? Can I ever sit in a car?" This is for boys who are around, whose dream was sitting in a car. Says, "Yes, of course you can. You can if you believe you can, and all you have to do is study a little harder." And every day when I sit in the car, I remember that story because I was one of those listening to the stories of that grandmother. And she used to say, if you're sitting in a car, sit in the front, drive the car because the car must be yours. If you're sitting behind, then the driver must be yours, the car must be yours, and you should be able to pay that driver. And every day when I sit in the car and I'm traveling, I'm reminded of this grandmother because the grandmother who told all those lovely stories that day was my grandmother. The boy who got slapped is again yours truly. I believe in conviction. There was somebody one day, they held my hand and pulled me into a better school. They paid for my education. I have the greatest of faith in people. I don't believe all of us have talents beyond compare. It's only that little coach out there on that ground who told me you can be a long distance runner. We have to find out what is the strength in each one of us. Sadly, organizations are always in a tearing hurry. They want the perfect fit and they don't look at near fits or even far away fits, but can we do something with what they have? So you ask me what it is, it's about that faith, the deep conviction that I have. Back to you, Uday.
Goes back to what Gopal said earlier about belief, and you're talking about conviction. And if I consider integrity and all those core values as a sort of edifice of trust for life itself, you and I hopefully need to and ought to, I would say, bring in more understanding about ourselves, discover ourselves in ensuring that legacy continues, make it more sustainable, make it more appealing, make it more in the sense that without demonstrating to say, okay, you do this, but by sheer action and sheer practice and over a period of time. Your grandmother's story from those times when you're a child to now, I suppose every time you get to the car, it comes back to you. And I'm sure the audience here also take away not just traveling the car, but they would find connects with their own lives to ensure that this is sustainable as a legacy. Here is one for you coming up from Murli. How can we sustain the values in a larger organization environment? And you've been all along thoroughbred in many diverse large organizations. Nothing. This would be child's play for you.
Well, first of all, this is a very deep question. I believe that each one of us has the power to influence. It doesn't matter where you stand along the organization because you either have the power to make a decision or to influence a decision or even at a subliminal level steer the course of a decision. And I'll give you an example. There was a time when there was a very, very important business leader. And this business leader had done something which was, let's say, off the course, not something that the person should have done. And it came to somebody's attention. And then that business leader's somebody said, I don't know whether this is big enough. And there was this young gentleman who came up and said, I don't think this is right. I think this has got to be surfaced. Well, long story short, there was an investigation. The person who was the most talked about business leader, because that person was bringing in a lot more to the organization in terms of, you can name it, in terms of business, this, that, etc. That person was gently eased out. It didn't come out because there were some very senior people going in and making that call, because ultimately in organizations, there's got to be a congruence along the line, right from the person who's at the bottom going all the way to the top, because that builds culture. And a couple of actions like this, and then you're in a position to cement that particular value in an organization.
I can ask for more. I'm sure on behalf of the audience, they can ask for more too. Here is another one, which I'll just put up. How have your personal learning enabled your hiring approach, especially as organizations define what success looks like? And you can connect that with values and ethics and ethos in the organization. Would be brilliant.
So I go back to my favorite example of people who I believe. So again, this is a story. I'll keep it really short. I was going to be hiring for a person who's a regional manager for the West in one of the companies where I was working. A lot of resumes, none ever. That evening, I was feeling so exhausted. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. In the corner of that particular large hall, I found a light. I found somebody singing there, and I asked this gentleman what he was doing, and he says, "I'm making pay slips." Pay slips? What are you singing about pay slips? He said, "Sir, you don't understand. One extra zero, somebody is extremely happy. Take away 1 0, somebody is very unhappy." So I was very curious. So I said, "Hey, listen, it's pretty late. You finish with all this. I'll see you tomorrow." I called him to my office the next day, and this gentleman came by sharp. And I said, "Where do you study?" Oh, so he said, "I did my MBA." "Where did you do your MBA?" Remember, at that time, I was a very arrogant man from a leading business school. And he said, "I did this from so-and-so school." I said, "I've never even heard of that school." He says, "Sir, it doesn't exist because 1 year after I went to that school, they closed down that school." "Okay, where did you do your undergrad?" So he named some school, which was not a great college at all. So what's your percentage? Now, I don't want to even mention what that percentage is. But there was a certain positive attitude about this gentleman. I mean, there was some spark. I got a call. There's a gentleman on the guy, Sanjay Bhaduri. He called me and he said, "Hey, Nathan, I need, what happened? Western Zone region, this, that." I looked at this person and I said, "Sanjay, I got somebody for you. He's my best. But please make sure that you don't pile on to him, because he's really one of a kind." Well, this gentleman moved to Bombay. He didn't know a word of Hindi. He moved from strength to strength, later went on to become a director of human resources at Hewlett Packard. I will never forget this gentleman because he had something which was so much needed. He didn't come from any big school. One of the finest. At least there could be one person in the audience who would know Maither Reddy. And what a guy. So perhaps it's a lot to do with us. In my hiring, we all look at whether they have just two qualities. One, does that person have initiative? Does that person have a certain drive? Is that person, drive also equals passion. If the person has it, rest of it, we can learn.
Thank you. It's been very profound listening to this element also from you. You brought in the Dalits of the world, Mahindra Reddys of the world, grandmothers of the world, the Bahrupians of the world, which is the title of the book that you wrote recently. When are you going to write a book on values and ethics? You are brimming, unbridled, brimming with so much to offer to the larger world beyond this 1 hour constraint, Nathan.
So thank you for asking that question and stoking me. Yes, indeed. I have an agreement to write a book by the end of this year and post all the usual thing that it takes to edit and all that. Hopefully, at the end of the second or maybe third quarter of next year, that book should be out. But
wish you all.
I have all the material, I guess. And it's a lot of encouragement from guys like you, sir.
Well, you don't have to scout around the material. It's all within you and all around you. So all the very best for that mission in life. I'm afraid that we need a close session in a couple of minutes' time because we are running out of the boundary and there are sessions waiting. All that I want to say to you, Nathan, is that you stood up, you spoke up, you showed up. And brilliantly so. And it's been a very touching gesture to take our invitation on behalf of ICF India Conclave to be here. We are grateful to you. And alongside, I want to say, may your tribe increase, Nathan.
Thank you. Thank you.
May your tribe increase.
You've been a friend, you've been a colleague in these kinds of activities for very long. I really value our friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I feel very honored to share the stage with you today. Well, on behalf of ICF India Conclave, thanks to Nathan, thanks to the delegates, we're 80 plus right through the session. And also thanks to Gopal, who would leave and take care of his granddaughter. And I only wish that the continuity in terms of conversation learning would continue. And I'm sure, Nathan, I know very well you respond so quickly and rapidly. I don't know what that secret is all about. So the delegates can connect with you anytime. And the next sessions we have, coming up, we have.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have in the afternoon a few sessions coming out. I'm sure the audience will be raring to go. And all the very best, Nathan, and all the very best delegates. And thank you for this privilege of hosting this session. Bye-bye.